Shop Chat! Shop Chat!
Well, on this exciting episode of Shop Chat, we are going to decipher a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, the baritone part. And we have assembled 4 stellar baritones today to give us insight into how to sing the part that truly makes barbershop barbershop. Would you please welcome Mr. Gary Lewis, Tony De Rosa, Brandon Guyton, and Brian Beck. We're excited to talk to you today about how to sing baritone.
Once upon a time, a girl with moonlight in her eyes put her hand in mine and said, "To me tomatoes and mashed potatoes, give me the simple life. I know a cottage small is all I'm after, but if I put your arms around
to address the first question to you today. You have such an amazing barbershop background. You've won a gold medal singing tenor with platinum, a gold medal singing baritone with Max Q. You've medaled on bass, and I have no doubt you could do the same on lead. In fact, I'd like to just go ahead and volunteer to be the tenor of your quartet when you sing lead. But what I'd like for you to do to begin with today is, because you have so much experience in all barbershop parts, just describe for our audience what you understand the role of the baritone part to be compared to the other parts in barbershop.
Oh, well, first of all, thanks for having me. I love Shop Chat and I love you guys, so honored to be here. You know, the baritone part is just kind of like what you said in your introduction. It is a mystery wrapped in an enigma, and it takes a real special guy to attack it in the first place. And, you know, baritones get such a bum rap in barbershop. I think it's mainly because it's misunderstood. Every part has, you know, a very distinct role, but the barbershop role, or the baritone role changes depending on the song or the range of it or who you're singing with. And so I think that to boil it down, at least for me to kind of figure it out after having sung some different parts. Fortunately, when I sang baritone, the person that was singing lead in my quartet is the best baritone ever. So Tony, and I mean that, but Tony was really invaluable to me to help me, you know, to find which way to go. And in most cases, it's, you know, a lot of times baritones are told to stay out of the way. You know, you don't want to be heard. And sometimes people will say, you know, if people say they don't hear the baritone, that's the best compliment. And I think that can be a little bit tricky. But what I learned from watching and listening to Tony sing baritone is to try to emulate the lead as much as possible. And for me, that was a natural thing because I'd already been singing with Tony for a lot of years. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, just trying to find the color of the lead voice, especially when your notes are above the lead. But pretty early in my barbershop baritone career, I received some unsolicited coaching from another De Rosa. That would be Lois De Rosa, who, you know, she's such a fan and she's so great and so supportive. And she's almost like a mom to me. I've known her for so long. I just love her dearly. And she came up to me after one of her performances. She said, you know, I can see you thinking up there. And, you know, because she's so big into performance. And she would always say to Tony when he was a youngster, razzle dazzle. In fact, I would imagine she still does. So, you know, that helped me a lot to understand my role is that, you know, I also have to perform instead of just sitting there, moving faders in my mind and trying to figure out how my part fits in. So it's kind of a delicate balance of all of those things. But there's really not any one thing that you need to do to be a successful baritone. You got to listen, but you have to know your stuff and everybody else's stuff so well that all that stuff is kind of happening in the background so that you can still perform and be comfortable. That's the
Great.
semi-short answer.
Sure, very good. Tony, what would you like to add to that in terms of the role of the baritone in a quartet?
I mean, I think Gary kind of covered it all, Shane. I mean, you know, I wasn't really paying attention. I was kind of tuned
Well, let's just move right along then. Brandon.
No, I think, honestly, the biggest thing for being a baritone, like the top whatever things for being a baritone, look at Brian Beck. That's awesome that he's joining us. Hey,
Finally.
BB, nice to see you, pal.
Zoom hates me. It took me too long I had to call Holly to get back in. It wouldn't let me do.
No. We're just getting started. It's awesome to have
good.
you. So Shane, in answer to kind of your question from a standpoint of, adding to just some general, bullet points for baritone singing, for me, I mean, from a general standpoint, the first thing is it's the selfless part. I mean, it is the one part in barbershop and in ensemble singing that I feel was it took me thinking the least about myself. I mean, a lot about myself from a standpoint of how to do it well, but everything about baritone is making others look good. You want your bass to sound great. You want your lead to sound awesome. You want to make sure you're connecting to your tenor. You want to color the overall sound of the group in a way that, yes, you're complementing the sound, but also kind of driving in a way to make sure that you're really gluing it all together. Between that, hopefully having a pretty proficient range to be able to scatter all over the place, and then really having a good ear along the way, to make sure that you're really hearing not only the tuning of chords and so forth, but also just, again, complementing vocal colorings and that kind of thing might be a kind of an overall compliment to where Gary was going.
Great. Brian, we've been talking about how you would define the baritone's role compared to the other parts. And you're another extremely accomplished barbershop singer. You've won gold on 2 different parts. You've medaled on a 3rd part and came within a whisker of medaling on all 4 parts. So from your point of view, how would you define the role of the baritone compared to the other parts?
Okay, I've been thinking about this a little bit since I didn't know it was a baritone thing until this morning. I think there are a couple of ways that you understand chords. There's pure knowledge where you actually understand the scale and know what a 3rd is, know what a 7th is. And there's instinct, and I think the instinct that Tony was talking about is you hear it, you've heard it before, maybe you play a little ukulele, but you don't know the names of these things. So there's the instinct is where you have the ear, like he said, but you still have to, what a 3rd is, but you don't know to call it that. That's the instinct.
So you might call that using the force.
Using the force.
The baritone part.
In my case, of course, I was so exceptionally skilled. Okay. I paid attention when I was a youngster in band, and so I did study theory on my own a whole lot. And so when it came to singing baritone with the Dealer's Choice, of course, first of all, I wrote lots of the charts. And when you have a 3rd, you know what to do. You lighten up a tad, little high. 7th, they say you sing it flat. I just sang it right in the middle. And power the roots and the 5ths and back off on the 3rds and 7ths. But if you know where every chord is and what your part is, then you're way ahead of the game. If you have to instinct it, then it's longer, I think. But
gotcha. Very good.
Case, I think the strength was the actual technical knowledge of all that stuff.
Gotcha. Very good. Now, Brandon, I remember a few years ago, I heard a coach say one time that he thought that baritones were either naturally lead tuning baritones or bass tuning baritones, and he would work to try to figure out which one the baritone was as he would coach the quartet. I'm curious if you have found that to be the case, and if so, from your own experience singing with, two pretty different quartets, how did you adjust either to the lead or to the bass?
The answer is yes. Tuning is like a soup, right? I mean, it's not binary. There's a lot of things that go into it, and it's never fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to have this is for me, a mentality of I have to tune to this or to that, sort of, I don't know. I don't know how I would do that. It's just sort of like you're taking in all the information at once, which is part of the fun of it all. It's just sort of happening real time. Your synapses are firing. You're listening, and you're adjusting. Oh, I'm a little low, and I hear, and that's just sort of the magic part of it. As they've said so beautifully, it definitely is about the understanding, but also the ear. And one of the things that I thought a lot about it through the years, and had so many great mentors that are here on the screen, and just studying how they do it. The one thing I think that's also true about baritone singing is that I think a lot of baritones sing in a way that's not subtractive to the chord. In other words, they're just sort of singing, and it doesn't necessarily hurt the chord. But what I think is really true about the baritone is that you can sing in a way that you can make every chord better in many real ways. The tone colors that you're singing with. I could just sing it pretty, and it wouldn't hurt the chord. But if I just do this one other little thing with my voice, all of a sudden there's like this sparkle or this magic thing that happens. So I think additive singing, it's just sort of a mentality of part of what Brian and they're all saying is like, you got to know where the chord is, but also knowing vocally, like, okay, this is a different thing that's happening in the chord right now. And if I just make this slight little vocal adjustment, as opposed to just singing pretty, which is great too. I mean, I think that should be the first instruction, is always sing beautifully. But the second one is not just to be in the chord, but know exactly what I can do to make it better. The leads don't have to think about that. They don't have to think about what do I do to make this chord better. They're thinking about all the other things that go into lead singing. Bass, maybe not as much either. Tenor, maybe a little bit, but I think baritone, for me, that's my primary thing, is like, what choice am I making right now, real time, and how does it improve or not improve this chord, and then try to figure out a way to make an adjustment.
So that constant sense of adjustment. I remember one time hearing Dr. Greg Line describe the 4 barbershop parts as the parts of a car. And I think the bass was the engine and the lead was the driver. And us tenors, we were just the paint on the surface, but baritones were like the transmission. Is that kind of how you envision what the baritone part is, making those constant adjustments?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's just but I think also, as Brian said, it really is about, I think people joke about baritone being the hardest part, and in some ways it is, in some ways it isn't. I mean, I wouldn't want to sing lead. I stand next to Michael Slamka, and I think I could not do that for, a 45-minute set. I could not do that. I wouldn't want to do it. But I think where the baritone part, sort of the magic is, having the ear, having the tuning, having the ability to really, I think, thoroughly understand your instrument, to know, should this note be brighter? Should this note be warmer? Should this note be wider? I mean, I think in many ways, and this is my opinion, that you have to have a better mastery of your instrument in that sense, to make it be more pliable, to make it be more adjustable on the fly than the other parts.
Gotcha. Very good. Now, Tony, I heard somebody say one time that they felt like lead was the easiest to hear and the most difficult to sing. Baritone was the most difficult to hear, but the easiest to sing once you do hear it. Since you've sung both of those parts in your quartets, did you have the same experience, or how did your experience differ from that?
For me, and I just realized now with Brian on the line, obviously Brian's done it both as well, which is just awesome. And by the way, Brian, I did make some comments on some Zoom sessions that I was having with choruses the last couple nights about you, just so you know how you were pretty instrumental in forming my baritone chops along the way. But there was a question here. Oh yeah, lead is definitely the easiest part to sing. or sorry, easiest part to learn without a doubt, in my opinion. I mean, but after singing both, lead is absolutely the hardest part to deliver, and to deliver consistently, because there's just no hiding, as Brandon was just mentioning. You know, I mean, standing next to Mike and hearing him lay that out there for 45 minutes. I mean, going from baritone to lead was really challenging in that regard. Baritone, for me personally, because it was just kind of I referenced my early beginnings of barbershop were always harmony part based. I mean, I started on tenor and then I moved to baritone. So truly baritone was never that difficult to learn for me. It was just kind of thankfully something I heard along the way, you know, hearing stuff about that everyone's saying about chords and knowing where you are in the chord, that kind of stuff was something that kind of between, you know, instinct, as Brian said, but also having a knowledge of chords wasn't too difficult. So depending on what the writing was, then baritone actually was decently difficult to execute. And I think as our style of music has expanded and evolved, if you want to use those words, those are loving words, positive words, along the way to use. So I'll stick with those. But as the style has shifted a bit, and arrangers have challenged certain things, and melody lines are very, very different. What I think has been difficult in the execution of baritone is simply the range that a lot of people have written for it, and being able to deliver on, you know, certain notes or certain parts of the chord with everything that is needed or really, really required, you know, because sometimes if you're up in higher parts of the register and it's like, man, the only way I can really hit that well is to float it. Well, that might be fine for a chorus, but for a quartet, you might need more visceral energy to make that moment really happen. And that might even be why the arranger wrote it the way he or she did. So, you know, being able to do that, and then being able to still have enough forward placement and support for things on the bottom end of the register to be able to support, you know, maybe your bass and the bass clef in general, the engine of the sound. You know, I think that, for me anyway, singing with Keepsake, and then definitely with Platinum, where there was a lot more range induced, you know, things into the actual part itself, became, to me, very difficult to execute. And in some ways, again, the hard thing about lead and execution of lead is just the consistency of it, that it never goes away. You're always that personality in front. But a lot of times the range of it ends up not being, because the melody just does what it does.
Right. Gotcha. Now, Gary, I have a question for you, particularly because not only of your history in singing barbershop, but also because of your work, which is as a choral music educator. You have sung tenor, and you're singing bass right now in a quartet. And I think a lot of barbershop singers who sing those parts feel a tad more comfortable just because of the range where those parts sit. But I think a lot of barbershop singers, particularly in the chorus setting, find baritone challenging just because it puts you in those mid-range breaks that can be so difficult. I mean, I know from experience with the Heralds, I've sung tenor, and I've sung lead, and I've sung baritone. And as my director will tell you, of the worst of those, by far, it was the baritone that's been the most of a struggle for me, because it just, for whatever reason, puts me at odd places that even when I'm singing lead, I don't feel the same way. So I'm curious, from your vantage point, having sung in all of those different registers, and also as a music educator, what advice can you give to barbershoppers learning how to navigate the baritone part and some of where it puts you in your range?
I mean, it's a great question, but it might be a bit of a long answer. You know, that any coach would say drills become skills. And there's a lot of, when I'm teaching, I make so many connections to sports and athletics, because a lot of my young people can just strongly identify with this physical activity of a sport. But as far as how the baritone goes compared to the others, you know, I think baritone is so much more gymnastic because of how you have to change your voice depending on a number of factors. The chord tone you were talking, as Brian mentioned, and how to tune the chord tones. But then the range plays a big factor, because sometimes you're above the lead and you're doing something really high and it needs to be strong. Sometimes you're above the lead and it needs to be light, and everywhere in between. So that's why I think why barbershop baritones get called the chameleons of our hobby, because the really good ones do it in such a way that you can fulfill all of those needs at a high level. But
Mm-hmm.
for someone that's just starting out on the baritone part, you know, as with anything, I'd say, just ease your way into it. Don't grab the chart to, when I see an elephant fly and just say, I'm going to go sing the baritone part. You want to start with, start with a polecat and start to learn. And the best way that I found for learning is to just listen to yourself. We all hate the sound of our own voice for a number of reasons we don't need to get into, but man, there's nothing like hearing yourself back and go, oh, that's what I did there, and now I need to do this differently on the next pass. And with that, those drills become skills, and you get better at it. Beyond that, having someone like your director or a coach to be able to help you along the way is, that's just the best way to learn.
Okay.
Think about it. For as long as we've lived, people have learned their skills by and large from being an apprentice to somebody who was skillful.
Sure.
And it's that way with just everything. And I've been fortunate to be around some really great mentors and kind of did some self-mentoring just by listening. So if you don't have the opportunity to be in a quartet with someone who can mentor you, you can pick up a lot of things by listening and trying to figure out not just how to, why they made that sound or what it sounds like, but how they made that sound, and experiment with your own voice to, with the forward placement and all the different colors in there, and all the thirds and seventh tuning. And so there's a bit of a learning curve there, but it's well worth it, because as Brandon was saying earlier, I really loved the comments he made about the baritone part. But once you're able to get to that additive level, there's a really great satisfaction that you get when you really feel like, oh, that choice that, oh man, I finally made the right choice and made that chord better. And it's almost like a game in some ways, where you're trying to just get the highest percentage of additive content.
Right.
That's the part of it that I love about the baritone part, is just the challenge of trying to make it great, and failing pretty regularly, as Tony, I'm sure, will point out here pretty soon. But,
Stop!
Before Brian comes on and says something really brilliant, can I just add one thing to that, and then a get off my lawn moment? So I would say to 100% what Gary said, and just study some vocal pedagogy. I'm telling you, the best advice you could give any singer of any part is just learn how to physiologically work your instrument. I studied classical voice. It was the best thing I ever did. I wasn't going to ever sing classical voice, but I just learned how to stretch my instrument in ways that I was never going to have to stretch it that far again. But it allowed me to sort of push the boundaries of what I knew about my voice, so that I could then say, I can make this choice or this choice. So just study your instrument. Studying barbershop baritone or whatever is great, but I would put study your voice above that. Mm-hmm. And then the get off my lawn moment is this. And I'm only halfway kidding with this, but I always say this to the young guys in our chorus who stare at the tag apps and sing like 35 tags in 2 minutes, because they're just tags. If they know in our chorus there are no tag apps allowed, not in my presence, I'll smack that sucker out of their hand. And here's why. There's a lot of reasons, but it's to exactly Gary's point. So much of where I would think all of us say we found this is standing nose to nose to 3 other guys, just opening up your ears and hearing. Your antenna is all the way up. And I go, okay, Brian is doing this. Well, then I've got to, and then just that sort of, that face time, that ear time of just standing in a circle. That's the way it's always been done in barbershop. And I think you learn so much about where that fifth should be and how loud should it be, just by standing in those circles and exploring that sort of quartet rehearsing full songs can't give you. So I think that's a really valuable and fertile ground for young and new barbershoppers. It's just getting with some good singers, standing around in a circle, taking your time, put down the phones, and just explore your voice in the chord. Okay, sorry. That's enough. Get off my lawn.
Can I add to that a little bit?
Sure.
When I'm singing baritone, well, the first point I'd like to make is that a baritone needs to learn the song. needs to learn the melody. With Dealer's Choice, we did a lot of unison singing, so we all knew the melody. It's a whole lot easier to harmonize. Okay, I got this third coming up, but I know the song. The second thing is the technical part, and I could not agree with Brandon any more than that. When we won in '73, I was singing baritone. Moved to LA, and I studied with a guy named Joseph Klein, who was a voice teacher, very heavy on the technical stuff, support, getting the larynx down, the stuff I didn't even know existed, to be honest with you. My first lesson was, oh, there's a bunch of stuff that you can do on purpose that I didn't even know existed. But I could not have sung lead with the Ramblers without Klein, because it is such a different animal. First of all, it took me a year to stop listening. Mm-hmm. That's the musical part. You can't listen. You sing your part, period, as a lead. I probably, Tony will, having done the same thing, baritone first and then lead, might agree with that, or might not, I don't know. But I think the technical aspect of singing lead is so important. Like Brandon said it, you got to know your instrument. So after I got done with him, my guys said, I was coaching the Ramblers, and they said, well, Thornton's leaving town, so you're our new lead. And I said, but I'm a baritone. They said, not anymore. But if it hadn't been for Klein, I couldn't have stepped in and done that. So
gotcha. Very cool. That's great. Well, you know, I think one of the heartening things that all of you have said in a different way for all of our baritones or aspiring baritones is it can be intimidating sometimes to try to learn music theory and things like that. But there is a lot to be said for just really listening, and then learning how to add and contribute based on that. And that's one of the things that you all have emphasized in different ways all through this conversation. I have two questions left that I want to do sort of a round robin, just ask each of you to comment on these. And Gary, I'll start with you. In addition to all that we have talked about today, what are some other just rehearsal tips for baritones you'd like to just throw out for everybody listening?
Well, everyone should record every rehearsal. Just throw a phone down. It's so easy anymore. We all have a world-class recording device in our pockets at all times. You don't have to get crazy with it, although I am very guilty of getting crazy with recording setups for rehearsals. So record and listen, like really listen multiple times, and do like some A/B comparisons. Like, I wonder what this would have sounded like had I done this. Mm-hmm. So the big tips would be to listen to yourself, listen to others, and don't be afraid to seek help from a mentor, even if it's not, a gold medal baritone singer, someone from your chorus, your section leader. No matter what skill you have, there's somebody that has done it either longer than you or has a higher level of skill that can help you. And so don't be afraid to ask for help. If you don't ask, the answer is always no. So
great.
Go for it.
Very good. Tony, what are some rehearsal tips for baritones you can think of to add?
I would go along with kind of the general discussion about just mastering your own voice more. I mean, just because the listening thing and the understanding theory thing has already gotten out. I mean, just being a responsible singer means like warming up, warming down, and being religious with that. I mean, very, very dedicated day in, day out to vocal care, yes, but just understanding your voice, as Brandon had said early on, but getting into a place where you're in a regular rhythm with your instrument. And that comes from, literally doing vocal warm-ups or some sort of time during your day where you're spending time, vocalizing and really getting a handle on that kind of thing. Would maybe just be a consistent that. And I think a lot of people who haven't gone through the learning system, so to speak, academic world of, training, so to speak, would probably sit back and go, well, I just, I warm up for a little bit just to get going. And that's all well and good. It shouldn't take a ton of time, but there is a lot of technique that comes into play, and technique learning that comes into play by spending those dedicated minutes by yourself with your own voice and working through different parts of your register that maybe need attention that you don't know at the time it's going to, that you need it, but it's going to show up in a passage somewhere, and you're going to want to have access to the tools that you need to be able to put the right color in the sound and deliver the power and or range or whatever, and flexibility that you need. So warming up, and definitely as you get older, you got to warm up every day. You can't just warm up once a week with a chorus or once a week at a quartet rehearsal. The muscle just does not work that way.
Gotcha. Very good. Brandon, any rehearsal techniques you'd like to add?
I don't know if this is necessarily a rehearsal technique, but I think something that was so important to me, and still is, honestly, is that, I mean, I took a picture of the screen because I'm sitting here with two like baritone gods to me. And I think about my formative years, especially. I think a lot of barbershop today, it's not a criticism, it's not, but a lot of barbershop today is pyrotechnic driven. It's about the excitement and the exciting sort of things and virtuosity, because we've got a guy that can do this, let's feature him. And, I'm part of groups like that. So it's not a criticism, but I would highly encourage all baritones at whatever level to go back and just study and listen to the baritones of old, when it was about the ringing of a chord and the creation of a sound, because it's so instructive to learn about all the things we've been talking about, listening to the dealer's choice and the choices that Brian was making. Clay Schumard, with the Vagabonds, just one of the great voices ever in barbershop baritone. A guy like, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name, a baritone of Michigan Jake, Joel, is that right?
Joel Wilson.
Just the choices he always made, and just sort of blending. Become a student of those, not so that you could just necessarily try to emulate their voices, but kind of understand the formula of what they're inputting into the quartets that they're in, which are all very different, to kind of achieve that phenomenal result. Just study those voices, and not to disrespect the baritones that are out there today, because there's some great ones, but I think there's a lot of value in just spending 100 hours with Harlan Wilson. I mean, you'll learn so much about that, and it's so instructive, and then begin to extrapolate what you can from that, and begin to incorporate it into your own singing. I think was always very helpful for me.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the way to go back to Brian's point about intuitive singing. That would be the way to develop that, is just by listening to some of the old masters. Brian, do you have a rehearsal tip you'd like to add?
Yeah, Brandon mentioned singing with Harlan. I must have sung 1,000 hours with Harlan on Touch of Gold. So yeah, imitating is the sincerest form of flattery. I'd like to say this. I was a studio singer for all my life, and we always had a saying that one playback's worth 1,000 words. In other words, we each learned more from just that one. Oh, I did this, or so I agree totally with Brandon. The other thing is, this is not exactly a tip. Well, it's going to turn into a tip. As a clinician, I was not a big fan of scales, on the theory that we don't sing scales. But as I got older and learned a few things, I said, but you know what? Even as a baritone, if you sing scales and learn to sing them accurately, the right kind of support, the right coning, when you're going to go sing chords, you're better off. So as I have gotten older, I've become a fan of singing scales, arpeggios, da 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 da, and even in doing that, da 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 da, when you get to the top, more yawn, lighter, more space. And when you do it, when it's automatic, forever and ever, then when you sing chords and real notes, then you're in better shape.
That's great. And one last question, guys, just real quickly, in just a few words, describe what you enjoy most about singing baritone. And Brian, I'll start with you. What you enjoy most about singing baritone?
The biggest compliment I think I ever got was, I never hear you. Great. Because I was a lead matcher by instinct. I mean, I sang when I figured out exactly where Bill was with his space and larynx, so I started matching lead, and I didn't really care what Gary was doing, because he never missed a note in all the years I sang with him. But after learning to match the lead, then you really disappear because you don't. Every vowel is in the right place. Every timbre is in the right place.
Right.
So that's the fun to me, is disappearing and knowing that you're making a contribution, but no one really hears you.
Great. Now, I will say, not to pick an argument with you, Mr. Beck, but one of my all-time favorite things to do is to put the headphones on and just listen to you singing Love Letters Straight from Your Heart on the Dealer's Choice CD, because I can't hear you, but I know what you mean. You are contributing to make beautiful music, but to me, that just is a clinic on what a baritone should sound like.
Well, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Brandon, how about you? The thing you enjoy most about singing baritone?
Oof. I don't know. I mean, I think so much of what we talked about goes into all of that. I think it's been different for both of my quartets, what I've enjoyed about it. You know, the first one, singing with Chad, my brother, sometimes torturous, but also a joy. And also, you know, being that it was my first quartet, just the exploration of it all, the newness of it all, the creating of something new, and whereas I come into Crossroads and it's a whole different dynamic, looking for different things. So I've enjoyed different parts of it. I would say one of the biggest things for me that I enjoyed today, and this is a shift, and I think part of this just comes from perspective and being older and having kids and all those things, is I was so worried about me all the time, and the others all the time, others in the quartet with four voices, because you're in that competitive mode, that it wasn't always enjoyable. I mean, it was in its own way, but it wasn't always like from a personal. But now I think when I stand on the stage with Crossroads, I just feel thankful. And so even if we tank, and we do, especially the older we get, it's that used to tear me apart on the inside, and it still does a little bit. But I've just made peace about being on the stage with these guys and in this moment, creating this thing here and now. And I'm really grateful to have that, and much less tortured about it, and much happier. So I think that's what I enjoy the most, is just going up there with nothing and creating something with people you love.
Great. That's great. Tony, for you, the thing you enjoy most about singing baritone?
I love fifths. I love singing fives. I love knowing that, like, if I hear an octave, or if I'm coming into to five on a root position with my bass next to me, I just can't. I have it in my head before I get there, and I can't wait for the buzz. That, and then also I really like, or I liked, I should say, when I sang baritone, I like the anonymity. I like being able to know that everything that I'm doing is, in theory, going to make it hopefully much better every step of the way. And then I really like the fact that if people, to kind of what has been said here, if people notice me, that hopefully it's for all the right reasons. Hopefully it's the 1% or less in the audience that understands what goes into the choices that I'm making and how I sing and what I'm doing, and that those people would then be able to sit back and go, yeah, that was cool, to where I would be able to go, I know, it's awesome, isn't it? That kind of thing.
That's great. And Gary, for you, what you enjoy most about singing baritone?
Well, I love what everyone has said so far, and I agree with all of it. But I think what I love the most about singing baritone, having sung some other parts, is the fun of baritone is that you get to do everything. Your role changes from note to note, and at one point in the chord, you're fulfilling the role of maybe a bass, or at some point you're doing it all. And that, as a singer, is just so fulfilling. And beyond that, one thing that I just love, and I get really tickled, is when someone will give a compliment to the quartet to say, man, whatever, this guy really got that, but it actually wasn't that person.
Yeah, right.
It was you, or it was the lead.
Right.
And I love that when you've got it matched so great that people can't even tell.
Right.
And I was definitely one of those people that would roll it back over and over again. Is that Tony? No, that's Joe. Man, I can't tell. And that part of it was enjoyable as a listener, and even more fun to do as a singer.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, guys, thank you so very much for all of your time today. I think that you have definitely helped to clear away some of the mystery of the part that really does make barbershop. And I know that on behalf of our audience, we thank you so much for your time and your expertise and all the valuable insight you've given us. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Show.
It's been fun.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Shane.
Thanks,
Shane.
And thank you everybody for tuning in to this exciting episode of Shop Chat.
Shop chat.
Shop chat. Shop